we now need to talk about tents, it seems, because the Home Secretary has got a great, brilliant new idea that in order to reduce the demand for hotels, she's going to buy and erect some huge tents, I guess, in sort of army camps and places for the asylum seekers, illegal migrants coming across the channel. What are your thoughts to this latest idea? Is it just another sort of, dead cat thrown onto the table to distract the conversation with no chance of happening?
Well, it is summer, it is festival season, so why don't the migrants take part in the Great British Outdoors activities? No, you're quite right. I mean, the government, again, is just scrambling to deal with the symptoms and consequences of illegal migration rather than actually dealing with the real causes that got us to this point. Why is Britain so attractive, and how do you tackle the backlog? We can discuss that later if you want to, but I'm actually quite supportive of the general principle of this, even though the numbers that we're talking about, these tents will only house around 2,000 migrants. Is actually quite pathetic when you realise that we have 50,000 migrants in hotels, costing us £6 million a day. There were, I think, 73,000 applications in the year to March of this year. That's a third higher than last year. We've got 170,000 backlog of applications. And remarkably, of the 20,000 applications that were granted recently, 74% of those, that were seen, 74% were granted. So there's a huge issue here. The government's had a decade to deal with it. Building tents for just 2,000 people is actually quite pathetic and quite useless. But I've been saying for years, actually, we do need to build migration camps. But there shouldn't be a single migrant living in a hotel room for a whole variety of reasons, not least, of course, the fact that we're in the middle of summer now, and all of these towns, particularly seaside towns, are suffering hugely from the fact that tourists can't stay overnight in these places and are often put off from visiting many of these towns because of the threatening nature of the people who are...
Rafe, surely, if the human rights lawyers and the lefty do-gooders, if they say that it's inhumane and cruel to stay in a barge that is normally used for construction workers, British construction workers on offshore projects, if that's inhumane and cruel, then being in a tent is even crueler still. So this is never going to happen. They're going to sue, they're going to appeal, they'll take it all the way to the Supreme Court.
Look, at the end of the Second World War, there were 120,000 Polish soldiers and Battle of Britain Air Force pilots in around 260 camps all around this country, similar to those that we're now talking about today. And they were also joined by their families, by their wives and by their children, who couldn't go back to Poland, which was then under Stalin, and all properties had been confiscated. And so they were housed in these tents for a huge amount of time. That includes members of my own family. My mother's cousins were in the Polish military based here, and their daughters were over here as young girls. And I was amazed to find recently that they actually got married in one of these camps, and they were very happy and content. We're talking about people who were previously very wealthy and landed. They were quite happy to live in these conditions. We're not talking about Glastonbury-type muddy fields here. We're talking about very well-appointed tents fit for the 21st century. And of course, I don't think people in this country actually realise quite what the living conditions are in the countries from which these people are arriving. Even a run-down one-star hotel is luxurious compared to some of the shanty towns from which these people have come from.
Absolutely right. So let's just move on to the other big story, Rafe, this week, which was the exclusive in the Daily Mail about the fraudulent applications being essentially encouraged and aided and abetted by lawyers here in the UK for some of these applications in order to make them more plausible, more credible, so that they would be omitted. And maybe this practice is massively widespread, which is why you end up with this huge percentage of applications being accepted at sort of 75%. What are your thoughts on this? I'm absolutely outraged.
Well, every decent person should be outraged, but I'm not at all surprised. We knew that this was going on. The corruption here is huge. You've got, on the one hand, you've got the NGOs and the refugee councils tying things up in the courts. But then, of course, there's another team of lawyers here, the disreputable ones, who are engaged in this process. And you're quite right. It's a huge scandal. It needs to be exposed. There are so many areas here where the government clearly must have known or must have had an inkling of what's been happening. They've had a decade to deal with this. And it's not just this sort of issue. You know, a French politician recently said, if you want to stop migrants coming to Britain, make Britain less attractive than France. And another one of the ways that you can do this is by clamping down on the black market, because it's far easier for illegal migrants to disappear into Britain's underground economy through the curry houses and the restaurants and the sweatshops than it is in France. So whether it's these corrupt lawyers, whether it's corrupt businesses, or whether it's corrupt landlords who aren't actually doing the proper checks on their tenants, there are so many areas where the government really could get tough if it wanted to. Instead, all we get are these dead cats being thrown where the government knows that it's 18 months away from annihilation.
What should happen to these lawyers who've been doing this? And it sounds like there might be 40-plus firms that have been up to this. It could be a lot more. What should happen to these lawyers, Rafe?
Well, the first thing, obviously, is they should be brought before the Bar Council, and they should have their licences removed for solicitors. And secondly, they should face criminal charges. I mean, it is an offence. I mean, if you're creating one of these, everyone knows when you sign these official forms, you're signing acknowledging that it is an offence to make a false statement.
Would you send them to jail?
Absolutely. I mean, where else would you put them? I mean, this is the most despicable thing you could possibly do, in my opinion.
I agree entirely. I think they should be jailed for a very long time for fraud, and that acts as a proper deterrent. I think the whole thing is utterly appalling, and that people are outraged. But and that brings us on to the other point, which, of course, the same lawyers have been benefiting from. You know, that it turns out that when they appeal decisions that have gone against their clients, that we, the British taxpayer, we have to pay the legal fees for these appeals. Why is that? I mean, if these folk can afford €3,000 or €4,000 to make a boat trip across the Channel, they can afford their own lawyers, for heaven's sake.
Yes, and we know, of course, how clogged up our court system is, and this is just further insult to the British public who want to see justice done in so many different areas. And the government needs to act, because, you know, we didn't see any bankers going to jail over the financial crisis of 2008. You know, people's confidence in the institutions and confidence that our civic institutions and government will actually take action on these things has been severely dented. And so they do need to see something being done about all of this.
I mean, the whole thing is, I just think it's completely wrong. As you just said there, we're a soft touch, and therefore it becomes ever more appealing for the migrants to make the journey, because they know when they get here that actually they'll end up in the best conditions,
well,
and the greatest ability to work illegally whilst they're waiting years for a decision to be made.
Well, you've mentioned the cost, right? The £3,000 to £4,000 to come over here, if not more. You know, you could get a flight from Tbilisi to the UK from Albania for £100. If you're coming here and spending £3,000, £4,000, you're not coming here with the best of intentions and best of motives, because you've thrown away your passport and so forth. But, you know, if you really want to get tough on this, we would be creating a genuine hostile environment, which is why I'm in favour of these camps, because you want to make life here
Interestingly,
just meeting the bare requirements. And you know, Theresa May tried to do a hostile environment when she was Home Secretary, but that was very weak.
Yeah.
Denmark has done this the correct way. Both right-wing and left-wing governments in Denmark have brought down asylum applications to levels not seen through the 1990s. That includes only giving temporary visas, so people know that they will be returned home when they're safe to be returned home. They have all assets over $1,000.
Just had a message come in whilst you've been speaking, Rafe, regarding the tents for migrants. In October 22, the German government set up tents on a disused Berlin airfield in order to house 3,500 Ukrainian refugees fleeing a genuine war. Nothing was said, nothing was reported. I mean, the pure hypocrisy is utterly extraordinary. Just before